Hi everyone, I'm Gina and I'm a licensed therapist who got fed up with therapy. This is a one-woman show about my journey of finding the spaces between non-traditional approaches of healing. What I learned is that there's no one right way to heal, and you truly are your best resource. Therapists and healers are meant to support you on your path, but they don't have all of the answers. You do. This show is about the spaces between laughter, tears, thoughts, ego, soul, messy growth, and moments of joy. It's about personal liberation, inner knowing, and the tools that get you there. I will cover topics that make many of us uncomfortable and interviewing people who are willing to go there. I've spent thousands of hours listening to human beings navigate their life story, from rehabs in Malibu to homeless shelters in East LA, and now my private practice. It has been some of the most profound, painful, and beautiful moments in my life. Thank you so much for joining me. Hi friends, and welcome back to Spaces Between. I am super excited to have my really good friend, Kassia Meador, on the show. She holds an incredibly special place in my heart. I almost might get emotional talking about it. She was really there for Jonas and I when we were sick with COVID, whether it was bringing us soup and fresh juices, and she also held one of the most profound sessions for me when I was in actually the last week of being sick, and I just was in a really intense state with it. So I'm actually going to let her talk a little bit about, Cass, what did you do with me in that session, and give us a little background of how you approach your healing sessions.
Well, it's an honor to be here with you.
Yeah.
And also to just witness how you went through that portal, you and Jonas, who went through that healing crisis, as some call it within this field. And through that healing crisis, everything kind of hit this place of unraveling. And now it's come to this full, new, complete cycle of transformation. So like the metamorphosis of that kind of like going into the cocoon space as we witness in nature, the butterfly. And it's such a perfect example of what like true surrender looks like. And it becomes completely undone. And then it emerges into a whole new paradigm of life. It's no longer crawling, it's flying. Could the caterpillar ever imagine to fly when it's just taking its time inching across the ground? So I just want to kind of like honor that. And also say it's just such an honor to have been of support. More than anything, I was just there with you listening in that session. What brought me to energy medicine was I think surfing and being broken open myself time and time again. And I started to receive sessions in both cranial sacral and osteopathy. And I also was, with all my concussions, went to the top neurologist at UCLA. And I felt like, I don't want to say anything bad about Western medicine, because I think Western medicine is absolutely appropriate when it's appropriate. And when it's not, it's not. And going to that first neurologist appointment was after my last serious concussion. And it was also a week or so after I had already signed up for my first courses in cranial sacral therapy. And I remember walking into and out of UCLA feeling like sicker than I had ever been, feeling like the lights were making me feel worse than I had ever been, and feeling like there was just nothing that they could do for me but prescribe me medication, which was going to take me away from the healing. That was on a Thursday. My first craniosacral class was on Friday. By Monday, I felt better than I had in years, which I think with anybody suffering through anything, especially like concussions and head trauma, you can't see it. You can't see the muscles. You can still function around. If you blow your knee out, you have to let it heal, because when you try and take a step, it doesn't feel right. And when you go through different head traumas and stuff like that, it's it's not easy to understand what's going on. You just feel off. You feel dazed. You're forgetting things. For me, my speech was really off. I was stuttering a lot. Had a really hard time with any bright lights, a lot of noise, concentration. And then people are just like, oh, take some Advil. Well, Advil totally ruins your gut biome, which actually works with your brain. So then all of a sudden, all your systems are out of balance. So, this is a long-winded understanding of what brought me to energy medicine. So through my studying of craniosacral and polarity therapy, I went because it was helping me more than anything for my own personal healing. And with my sound practice, I started to get more and more one-on-one session requests. And I really wanted to support people with more, basically. And so I was like, I want to study something that's going to support this work and just be able to hold a bigger field and to be more resourced. And so I got into the Cranio program, and then there was a break between that. And, there was some classes in polarity therapy, and I'm like, oh, what's that? And then I took a couple classes, and it blew my mind and opened my heart. And then I started taking more classes. And so now I'm associate polarity practitioner. I have my license in craniosacral therapy. Through that, we also studied, holding space and deep communications, resonance and listening. So there was a bit of NLP communication and Gestalt communications, and ways of kind of communicating and holding space for people that I learned through that. And now I'm going for my BCRPP, which is the board certified polarity practitioner ship. And for me, it's just about learning. And as I learn, I can hold more space and I'm more resourced in supporting people. So for that session that we had that day, I mean, we're coming back, so I know we went far out to come back. Yeah. But really, it was just everything I've been learning. And more than anything, I was just hearing you. And I think to be heard is so profound. I know it has been for me. And to really be heard and to not have somebody tell you what they think or any of that, to just literally be heard. And I think that's really what the basis, and us having good rapport gave us this space for things to open up. And then tracing that energy through the body as it moves. Or other people have different ways. People have sensory, kinesthetic ways of processing energy. Other people are kind of more verbal. Other people see images or have things that they hear more clear, so there's all these different ways that we all work, and usually it's a couple, but and that was kind of the basis of our work that day together was just deep listening. I know it's so profound when somebody just hears me actually.
Yeah. And I would also say to the deep listening that you offered me there, and I wanted to talk to you about this because I still remember, and you know this, there was a time when I was questioning, I was asking myself, is this COVID? Is this psychosomatic? I mean, after 6 weeks, we really knew that it was, but within these sort of, Jonas and I would call them, they were these delusional spells, and that's what made it feel so different than a normal flu. And so within that space, but you had a way of not only bringing me back into my body and then with the deep listening, but there was, and I don't know if this, you would have to tell me what you did, but I remember you having me putting it in a TV box. And I think there were snakes inside the TV box. And then I blew it up with my eyes. I'm sure anybody that's listening to this is like, what? But it was the most profound in that moment, that sort of visual imagery of, now in the world of therapy, we call that externalization. You get it out, it's external, so for me, it was this visual kind of getting it out of the body. What would you say in that moment that you were offering, or what that was?
So absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up. And that actually brings me back to the moment. And it was kind of a technique that, they use a lot in hypnotherapy. And it's basically giving the client an opportunity to take action with their visualization and actually do something about it.
Yeah.
Actually like make what feels so big smaller and explode it. And so it is in some ways more of a kind of hypno technique that I've learned. I've studied like some hypnotherapy as well. And I don't do that with every client. In that moment, that what was coming up. And I think for me too, in supporting different clients, everybody needs different things. And that came to me in that moment for you because it wasn't about me trying to do something. It was like your higher self and my higher self communicating and you know, Gina, who's up here being like, this is what I need. And me actually being willing to listen and not being like, am I making this shit up? I mean, you know, because really there is a lot about that, you know, and I think there is a lot about, we've been trained, most of us, since we were little kids, that that's just your imagination. Well, thank God for imagination, because really that imaginal cell is what allows the caterpillar to turn into the butterfly. And it's what allowed me trusting that. And I think that's honestly something I learned through trusting my intuition through surfing and a deep trust of that. And so I was like hearing clearly that that's what you needed. So that's what came forth. And I think it's also about resourcing yourself. If you're resourcing yourself with all these different tools, then you have all these different pieces to pull from. And like I said, everybody needs something different. In that moment, you needed that. And there was something else that you brought up that I think is really profound, because as important as it is to listen and hear, and as important as it is to have verbal talk therapy, I do believe that it's really important to take it back to the body and to have that somatic opportunity to release. And for me, that's been really profound. There's so much that our body is the densest form of energy. Our physical bodies are the densest form of our energy systems. And in that, they hold the most. And by honoring the body and going to these places of tension, you allow the whole system to unwind and resource itself around whatever. I mean, you unwind something, and then that creates all this fluidity and all this flow and all this available energy. And then the whole rest of your system responds and opens because of it. And so the physical system opens, the energetic, the etheric, the auric, all layers of your being open through that. So I think that's really important.
Oh, it's so, I felt like in that session, I moved through, as you're saying, all of the levels. It was, and I was in such a fear space before. I mean, I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand why the symptoms kept changing and shifting. And especially when I was just so out of sorts, but again, bringing it back into the body, but then moving through these different, as you're saying, these etheric fields, it really was a huge shift for me. And then whenever I would get those continued sort of, I don't know what I would call them, delusional spaces. It was almost like my vision would get blurry. I would have, you helped me resource, and through that visualization, I would just go back to that space. So it was something, it was so different and profound for me. And again, I just want to thank you for that. It was very special. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm happy it was helpful.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think in those spaces, like as a practitioner, you know, it's like a constant practice. Like I'm learning as I'm going through working with different people, because everybody's energy is informing the session. It's not something I'm doing to you or for you. Just like I'm sitting there listening, holding space, and things are coming up, you know, and you're resourcing yourself and you need things. And there's just this space between us for that to actually be brought. You know, they always say when two or more are gathered in my name, it's like having that, like, hey, we're here together and what's available, and being open and willing, you know, I mean, that's the thing. There's open and willing. And in that place, I'm just so happy that that was a tool for you. You were able to continue to work with.
Yes. Which brings me to, I wanted to ask a little bit more about polarity specifically. So if you were to describe to somebody, or even with me, if we were to go through some, I don't know if there's specific techniques or if it's more of just a theory, is that I want to get clear with you what polarity, and I think it would be really interesting for listeners, particularly people who've done more just traditional therapy, or what is polarity?
So polarity therapy was kind of coined and known from Dr. Randolph Stone's work. And he spent a lot of time in India. And his main teacher was a sound teacher. So, working with the sound current. That said, from what I understand, and then Dr. John Beaulieu, who was actually a clinical psychologist and actually came to be working with sound and vibrational therapy, and then further Dr. Stone's work in his own way, right? So Dr. Stone and polarity therapy, there's a lot about it that has to do with the elements. That has to do with the magnetism, the positive, neuter, and negative pole, and not as in bad and negative, but neuter. And so Dr. Stone studied all these different traditions and all these different lineages. And, he created different protocols around supporting people in resourcing different elements. And through those elements, there's different openings, there's different energy centers. So it works back to, the chakra system. It works back to, the elements as in water, and Pisces being water, and water's the feet. And the feet are truly the North Pole. And South Pole. And in that South Pole, they're the past. And our middle body is kind of that equator, neutral point. And the neutral point isn't absent from everything. It actually encompasses all aspects of everything. So it's hard to say in words in a short conversation. Yes. Because there's so many layers upon layers upon layers of it. It's a wonderful tool for kind of having clues and tracking energy. If somebody's constantly oh, this shoulder thing, it's a chronic thing. It's a chronic thing. It's moving from a long time. And there's different places of assessing that issue in the shoulder. It's on the right side. Well, that's kind of more of the force side, the more male dominant side. The shoulder is the air center. Oh, I'm always in my head and I can't get through this stuff. And well, that's the air center. Is there a way to process that? There's also reflexes for that shoulder center in the foot. There's also reflexes for that shoulder center in the hand. There's also reflexes for that shoulder center in the face. So there's all these different ways of breaking the body up into these positive, negative, and neuter poles. And then also supporting it with the different elements. We live in a polarized world. There's the South Pole and the North Pole and the equator. There's this magnetism. There's all these elements that is what animates life. So if we're reflecting and bringing that back to the body and back to how we're storing energy, whether it's a physical injury, an emotional injury, the body braces and holds, so it's just different ways of accessing and opening up that energy system. So all flows smoothly. It's there's these rivers of life. And if one river is blocked up, it's not feeding all the rivers simultaneously. And then there'll be things that kind of shut down around that area. So I don't know if that is making sense. There's just so many different ways to address it. And really, it just goes back into supporting people and resourcing themselves and bringing attention and honoring what's up and knowing that there's just different ways of moving through things.
Well, that's really what I was going to say to you, because to go full circle back to you getting the more Western approaches to your concussions and your shoulder, and then us moving through these different modalities and ways that you're working. I just think it's really important for people to listen to. There's so many different ways to approach the mind, body, soul. And listening to you is, we're really pulling from all of these different spaces, but that healing can come. And I think with polarity, you and I probably could have an entire episode just on polarity, and you and I could even walk through a session where you maybe, but I find it fascinating.
It's totally fascinating. And it goes back to, you study some of the ancient Vedic texts. It all goes back to that like sattvic, rajasic, tamasic touch. There's different foods. Like Dr. Stone was really into health building through different foods. And all those foods go back to the different elements and have a different charge. So there's ways to support people. So if you're into Ayurvedic, it has that same sort of like principles. You go back to Hermetic medicine, in Egypt, it kind of goes back into that as well. So there's so many different things across all time and space. It's like the whole Caduceus current in our energy system that is illustrated in all of our Western medicines, the two snakes woven around the sphere. That's actually what that has to do with. This center being the center of spirit, our throat center is really our ether center. And that's where we take our first breath and our last breath leaves us. So if you think about that, that's when spirit animates the body. And then that rod of life being your spine. And having your whole, cranial nervous system kind of moving through that and animating your body. And really those vagus nerves are really kind of what, it's like supported the whole autonomic nervous system. It all comes down through that, the whole sacrum, that is like really, that's like the keystone. They always talk about keystone. So if you're really studying all these different things, it all kind of goes back for me to what Dr. Stone, like, it's not like he was reinventing the wheel. Yeah. He was taking all aspects of all this work that all these people did over so many thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, who knows, because time is nonlinear, that said, and pulled them together in a way that created a protocol for people to actually trace that energy.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Beaulieu, who was like a clinical psychologist at Bellevue and very like woo, like everything's clinical, blah, blah, blah. He's like, we're not helping people.
Yeah.
We're like shocking people and giving them lobotomies and we're not helping them. Yeah. What else is there?
Yeah.
And he made this general protocol, and the general protocol that he created, is profound. You could just do he's like, I spent years just doing the general protocol. And it was helping people so much. Yeah. And then there's specific protocols for your nervous system. There's some specific protocols for the lymphatic system. There's all these different systems that can be addressed through these different ways. That being said, what they did was they took all this stuff and gave it a form. And that form can be followed and traced in a clinical way. So it's not wooey.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like going back to like that. It's like, okay, cool. That's radical.
Yeah. And what I always go back to, and what this show is all about is that there is no one way to heal, but they're all, and that's really what I come back to is there's so many areas and how do I want to say this? Spaces that we can pull from, and a lot that are all connected to each other. And for me, what's been the most important is realizing the limitations of just talk therapy. And yes, but I'm going to segue because I'm going to be mindful of time, and I've got questions for you, Cass. So
and I can just talk all day.
So for you on your healing journey, what do you think? And I really want to break it down even to like a daily. For people listening to this, I love to hear what is everyone's sort of practical daily way of tuning into themselves, staying connected, and working through their stuff. What's part of your daily or weekly, would you say?
Well, part of my daily is a meditation practice.
Okay.
And sometimes, that meditation practice has been changing over the years. Right now, specifically, I'm working with mantra-based meditations in clearing different layers. There's a lot of asking and a lot of kind of like really just dropping in, and the mantra work is where I'm focusing some time and energy and intention towards right now. So I think like a big part of my practice is intention every day. And that's something that's always a through line. And then there's these different kind of modalities and these different ways that I can activate that. So that is something I'm working on right now. I also think that movement is an essential part. Dr. Stone talked about it too. It was everything from, getting sessions and it's your life. Nobody can do it for you. So getting sessions help especially when we might be stuck or we might be confused, to have some kind of like clearing of the path and like, oh yeah, I got to walk on it. But you have to move those legs. You have to take those steps. Food has a lot to do with it as well, as does movement practices and somatic movement, kind of like releases, and everybody needs different things. I know a huge thing for me is the ocean. It's really grounding. I have a lot of air and fire in my system. I can easily get stuck in the head and in the movement, and that's actually not where I can resource myself enough. And it's been supportive to get me to that point. And if I'm moving too much, that's a way of distracting myself from actually being with myself. So that's something I'm aware of.
Okay. So you were saying when you're moving too much and surfing is what grounds you. Or did I hear that correctly? Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I noticed that surfing grounds me. Just being in the water for me is very grounding. It's like a place that I can just like let go and unwind. I mean, just literally laying in a pool or water, a lake. That for me is just huge.
Yeah.
And there's elements of it that are a distraction. So sitting with it on land is also important. So I think for me, it's like there's all these different practical ways that I move through energy and I resource myself. A meditation practice, surfing practice, which is active meditation, movement-based meditation. Right now I'm doing a lot of witnessing. I'm doing a lot of noticing when something comes up in my system, noticing when there is a kind of like maybe a judgment or a thought form that comes up in me or a level of resistance that I'm like, wow, why is this affecting me? Well, it is probably hitting something in me that it resonates with through the laws of bioresonance, which is a sound understanding and practice. Well, what is that? What aspect of myself that it's being made conscious in that moment. And just by acknowledging it and leaning into it and owning that there's a part of me that I can actually do that work to heal and resource that part. And as I do that within myself, it gives more availability for those around me because it's not actually somebody else. It's not actually what this person's doing. And that's not right. And they should be a good person and blah, blah, blah. Well, dude, actually there's some shit in me and that's why it's hitting me so hard. So I can actually lean into my own stuff, work through my own shit that it's hitting. And then it makes it more available for other people if they want to. People are just where they need to be. It's all perfect, even though it may feel frictional. I mean, I think in this last 18 months, we've been witness to a lot of friction. And those that are most charged, I've been super charged. And it's because there's these righteous parts of myself. There are these righteous parts of myself that maybe have been abused. There's these righteous parts of myself that have experienced injustice, that want it to be right. And that's why it hits me. And if I just honor that part of myself and let that part of myself know it's okay and that it's being heard, then it helps everything. But if I go after the seeming villain in the story, that's actually just like entangling myself further. So I'm just choosing to kind of honor that place within myself, that small child maybe that was, on the other side of injustice and wasn't heard. And not even in this, I believe in past lives. So it's probably some stuff that's just so old at this point. There's just so much ancestral stuff that we're all carrying around. So it's just about like bringing light to it. I think personally, I don't want to put anything on anybody, but those are just, you brought up daily practices. That's a radical daily practice to be in all the time.
Yes, it is. And I really love that you went already to a space that I was going to talk about with you, which I have been thinking so much about. And I was just listening to a talk with Zach Bush, where I know a lot of people have very mixed feelings about Zach Bush right now. But the therapist who was actually, doing the interview talked to him about, we right now, how can we get to this space that we can actually have conversation with each other, whether it's about politics, the vaccine, by being able to somewhat neutralize the charge versus staying in this somewhat, the interview was saying this kind of like moral high ground, this righteousness. And I love what you bring up, which is what is that hitting in all of us? And how can we learn to navigate? And I think even you just saying the witnessing and the observing, and then really checking in with yourself, because it doesn't have so much to do with the other. And we're in a really interesting space right now, I would say, of how can we listen to one another and how can we not take it so personally? But this is a large conversation. I'm sure I can even feel it right now. Somebody listening to this, it's charged topics. And yeah.
I hear you. And I think it comes down to languaging.
Yeah.
Language is interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Each and every one of us have had our own experience, our own cultural dynamics, our own familial dynamics that we've been brought up in, our own, even like towns, different town to town. There's different energy systems that get kind of like forced upon us that we're not even consciously aware of. So how can any one person really understand someone else when they still don't understand themselves? So the invitation here is profound. It's an invitation to really hear where somebody's coming from and not to meet that with your own, because you're meeting it with your own stuff otherwise. And if you just sit back and hear them and try to understand the place that they're coming from, really try to hear where they're coming from. And it's that simple and not easy in the way that to really be able to like hear where somebody's coming from, you have to maybe, English isn't their first language. So there's ways that we use language and different words that we've been brought up around that have their own energy attached to them. Like there's so many different layers, whether, there's just so many different layers. I don't want to get into the whether this or that right now. That said, I think that there's just like such an opportunity to hear people and to not have our own, because our own projections, our own, everybody is entitled to their own opinion. That's choice. And that's beautiful, and true information from all sides is a luxury. And in taking all that information from all sides, the luxury is that we can make a choice. And we don't have to push that choice on somebody else. Just taking in all the information. And with me, I like to hear people. Hear what they have to say. I like to do all my own research. And then I check in with my body. I put my hands on my stomach and my heart. And I'm like, how does this feel for me? And I usually get an answer. And that's when I'm not in the mind about it, trying to rationalize one way or another, because a lot of stuff is nonsensical. It's like at the end of the day, we can argue any which side of the coin to the nth degree. And it doesn't make either of them right. It's just information. So, making a discerning choice around the information to be able to really understand all sides of it. And then we're starting to really hear each other as people. At the end of the day, people are frustrated. People are scared. People are trying to survive. A lot of people aren't feeling heard. A lot of people aren't feeling seen. And a lot of people literally feel like they're being attacked or going to be killed. And it's coming from a place of survival. The snake didn't mean to bite you. It was just feeling threatened by your presence. And in that, to back up and just let it move its way, you're able to watch it and not be, engaged in that. So I think like that kind of metaphor, like I think it's a massive opportunity. And we're humans and we have feelings and there's different things that charge us. So to be radically like in a place to sit with it. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's amazing. Because what I'm noticing now amongst friends and even family members, there's this very precarious dance of, do we go there? Do we talk about these things? Are we going to be able to hear each other? Are we just going to be shoving opinions down each other's throats? And it's a really, as you said, and I'm just going to go back to listening. Maybe that's some of the theme really of, I was about to say yours and I's session. This, talk is is listening and hearing somebody. And I think that's, it's massive. It's massive right now.
And hearing, totally. And just to go back to that, Gina, being able to hear where somebody's coming from and to be able to hear in your own system where that pain hits you. Usually that pain hits you in your trigger. And if you're able to really honor that within yourself, it's going to open up space for them. And you're not trying to get in there and make them understand. It's just like, whoa, this is hitting me and this is triggering me in this way. And I can hear that, I can hear that they're just frustrated that nobody hears them. I can hear that they just want stuff to go back to normal because normal felt okay, even though it might not have been. But it felt okay. And that's what I know. And I'm comfortable there. And I just want to be comfortable. And it's just kind of like, in all that, it's like, wow. Like I had a really interesting conversation with somebody yesterday when it came to a production. And this gentleman is in a field, and this is like, it's interesting. And I won't say what it is. I was trying to work with some recycled plastics. And he's in the plastics field. And he has been trying to make things out of recycled plastics for 15 years. And he's frustrated. And he's pissed. And it's not easy. And working with recycled plastics, he gets a lot of duds. And what is that? Creating more waste. Here's somebody in this field. And when I talked to him on the phone, I had some exciting ideas that I wanted to do this thing. I wanted to use these recycled plastics. What about this? And he's like, I've been doing it for 15 years. I'm over it. It's not possible. And I just heard what we couldn't do. And I could have been triggered by that. I noticed myself getting triggered. And it was my own frustration with how I'm constantly trying to do what seems to me as the right thing. And it's not made easy.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to see our systems that we've set up bind us.
Yeah.
And so I heard his frustration. And instead of engaging with him and being like, well, you should do this, he doesn't want to hear that from me. He's been trying to do this for 15 years, far longer than most people have been having this conversation. And he's fed up with it. So I was like, I hear you're frustrated. And I hear how there's a lot in our system that's not set up for it. And thank you for trying. And I hope one day soon we can get to this place. And I know that you've been dedicated to doing this for a while. And I hear that you're pissed. I'm pissed. And thank you, and maybe he just needed to hear that in that moment. He didn't need to hear me being like, well, this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And you should do this. You should do this. He's just like, what? So I was just able to hear his frustration in that moment. And I got frustrated. It hit a level in me. And I was like, oh, man, okay. Yeah. What is that part that's being frustrated? Not heard, not seeing, like feeling unable to make a change, even though I really want to. So I just addressed and honored that space in me and even traced it back to where I felt it, which was really in my chest. It was around my heart, and I think that those are just easy things to do in the moment. And I really think they make a profound shift.
I guess what I would say to that, though, you're so dedicated to the path, right? And to the path of really this sort of hyper awareness of self and what's being hit in the body and triggered. And I wonder, within society, what we can do to help people be able to take more inventory and be able to notice the triggers so that they can sit and breathe through a conversation instead of this is maybe my harsh evaluation of America, but I really think of us as sort of an adolescent brain. And that within that adolescent brain where the prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed, because it fully develops at 25, very black and white thinking, very reactionary. There's not a lot of listening in that. And I guess for me, and it doesn't have to be answered in this talk, but it's just a really curious thing of how, on a larger scale level, I think meditation is one of them. I think people actually being able to tune in and slow down and learn how to self-regulate a bit. But it's a big, because we're in a really heightened reactionary space. And And I know, and I'm on the path just as much in helping people really look at, and myself included, when my hot buttons get hit and how to just still engage in a conversation. I mean, I've had several within the last couple of months where, yeah, I'm just open and checking in with my heart and checking in with, hey, what's charged in me and how do I still hear this person? So, yeah.
I hear you. I hear you. And it's also not easy. No. It takes constant. That's why I'm saying I'm a practitioner, because I'm constantly practicing. It's like I had an instant the other day where somebody, kicked out, like they didn't kick out. They like ate it on a wave and kicked their board at my head. And I've been put in the hospital and unable to walk for almost 2 months when that happened before. And it was somebody just being totally unaware of anybody around them. And that was really triggering.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, that was super dangerous. And, you could have really hurt me. And he didn't apologize. And so I was like kind of at him.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I kind of went into an old pattern because I was feeling wounded and I almost felt violated. And that took me back. And I had to forgive myself after because I got angry. I got pissed. And I also like brought it up to him. I didn't like scream at him, but I was like, dude, that was dangerous. You could apologize, and also I could have been maybe a little bit more, I could have worked with my skills more. And I was also super triggered. So I was willing to lean into it. I was also willing to forgive myself. And I think a willingness to do the work and lean into it, also a willingness to observe what comes up for you, and a willingness to forgive yourself. Those 3 things are huge. If we can all if we want to, each and every one of us, if we can all make a decision to be present, because present is being consciously aware of what's happening. Just being present alone and being consciously aware and not going into basically like the back seat of cruise control and being like, oh, wow, like I had that reaction, just being present about it. You don't even have to do anything. Just like, oh, interesting, I had that reaction. And as you start to be more present, then in real time, you could be like, I'm having this reaction. I'm setting back. I'm noticing where it is in my body and what's coming up for me. And I'm just going to listen. Maybe I don't need to speak because I'm noticing I'm going into a place of reaction. That's like level 2. And then just by sitting back and doing that, then we could be like, oh, wait, I'm proactively hearing that this person is coming from a place of pain, and what's resonating with them is my place of pain. And I can choose to, in this moment, transform that pain. And just hear it. That's like level 3, and it's like, you're not always going to be there. No. It's a practice and choosing to show up every day. And just by choosing to be present for what comes up to us and for us in each and every moment. And as we do that work, more radical stuff is going to be thrown our way.
Oh, that is so true. I think I saw something yesterday somewhere as I was perusing the internet that, once you work through one karmic lesson or whatever language we want to put through it, or wounded space, the next one will be thrown at us and might be more intense. And absolutely. It's interesting you brought up that your experience surfing, because being back in Santa Cruz, and I was saying this to my dad, it's so challenging for me to go back home because there's such this level of aggression in the water. I saw somebody's ear get split open, and then the guy was going to take off. And then Jonas grabbed the guy and said, you can't take off. You have to take accountability for this and help this guy get to the hospital. I mean, we're talking like full. And and I was thinking a lot about that because I started to find myself get so judgmental and so just in my mind kind of the type of surfer. Oh no, this is the fence guys are here. I didn't expect this to happen. I got to do it. But so the witnessing for me, it's always the slowing down. It's really, you and I relate to being speedy in so many different ways. And my reaction in that way can also be very kind of like quick. And so for me, learning how to pause and go, well, why am I judging this person this way? Or why did I just say what I'm about to? Or
Totally. And then, I did just say what I did. And I'm going to forgive myself because that was a wounded part of myself that was coming through, that was being triggered from like something that was, and maybe there's probably a lot of people that felt that same trigger because of what's happened in time and life and many lives. You know, it's like also that was huge what you just said, and I do want to honor it. You know, accountability maybe is step one.
Right?
Accountability and presence. They're like really together, you know? And it's like, man, you know, like I apologize, you know, if I go for, you know what, I'm going to go up and apologize and be like, hey, sorry. Yeah. That really triggered me. I thought you were going to take my head off. And I've been really hurt before. Yeah. So that fear came out in that moment. It brought me back to that time. Yeah. And it was heavy and I'm sorry. And it really scared me. And I reacted.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to put my shit on you, bro. Yes. Just being accountable. And also it's dangerous. And also like maybe, you know, it could be better if you're aware of things. Yeah.
And to that point, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but to that point, also, I'm just thinking about being the receiver of that. If somebody was to go off on me or, you know, but then they came back over and they said, hey, you know what? I was really triggered. Just even that word, you know, or I was really triggered or it brought me back to this space. I mean, if we could start using and expressing ourselves in a way that, it would be profound. You know, it would be huge. Huge. Yes. Okay, I want to be mindful of your time and I'm going to give you, they're actually kind of big questions, but I give them to my guests in a more rapid fire way. And I'm going to give you one that I normally give people a bit more time with, but I feel like I want you to give me the most succinct. Yeah, they're just going to just go for me, Cass, and I know you can. So 2020,
a year of transformation. Okay. You know, a year, the cocoon, deep learning and processing and acknowledging and accountability. Okay. And transformation.
Okay. And 2021.
2021 is like I feel like it's like, oh, wow, spring. Yeah. Okay. It feels like spring.
It does feel like
things
spring.
Things are coming open again. Yeah. There's a lot more understanding. Yeah. There's been a lot of nourishing and deep release through this last process. And, you know, kind of a lot of people just nurturing themselves and cocooning. And so there's kind of like this opportunity to rebirth and everything feels a little fresh. Yeah. Everything feels a little raw.
I love that you brought that up. I think that really needs to be honored. And again, I was listening to a talk with Sadhguru talking about our sort of incessant need to become, or not become, but for things to just be normal, for everything to be normalized again. And I think I just want to say, you know, and again, to everyone listening, it's so important to really honor and integrate what we just went through in 2020. And as you said, those words were so beautiful. It's that raw, like I still feel it. It's this rawness. And when I feel myself quickening to a pace of over-engagement or going back towards my old ways of being, I have to slow down enough and really think about what did I learn in 2020 and being able to integrate that into this space now. And also the trauma of what was last year. You know, there was a lot of,
Totally. Yeah. There was a lot of trauma and just honoring that and noticing that people are, because of that, people are raw. Yeah. So we can meet people, we can meet ourselves first. Yeah. And others with more patience and understanding. Yes. And also I'm even just like sitting and being like, okay, like noticing when I want to do something and noticing like, do I need to do this? Yeah. Or can I continue to sit? You know, it's like, I even had some friends, they're like, let's run down to Cabo for like 4 days. It's like, no, I don't need to do that. Yeah. It's not helpful for the planet. As much as there's part of me that wants to, is it responsible? No. Am I still leading retreats and traveling? Yeah. I will. Yeah. And I'll go somewhere for like 6 weeks, you know? I also am not trying to put somebody down against making the choice, but it's just like noticing that came up for me. And I'm like, man, it sounds like fun. And do I need to do this? Yeah. Or is it just satiating a part of me that just wants to forget? Yeah. Like it is actually. Yeah. And like I can choose not to. Yeah. And in choosing not to, there's information there. For me personally, that's what I'm like, okay, like that just came up in the last few days. So it's like at the presence of my awareness. And I'm like, you know what, as much as I would like to go, Is it helping humanity, me going? No. Is me leading retreats supportive? Yes. It's giving people a space to unwind, and it's also part of like that I feel good about, and inviting people to do that. But this other one, as much as I'd like to go and be with my friends and just hang out and serve, I don't need to do it. It's not making the planet better. So I'm just like, I'm sitting with all these things right now, just like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, and to that note, I'm going to go even further than just, helping humanity from me knowing you, even helping yourself. Right. And I think because you and I both relate, and something I've always been drawn to with you, you're so generous. You're generous with your heart. You're generous with your time. And, we're women, we've always liked to be hyperstimulated. I'm not going to put us as one person, but at least for me, I relate to that sentiment. And for you, maybe it is more planetary, thinking of what the effects of too much travel on airplanes, et cetera, but also really looking at the self and going, is this going to serve me? More distractions or maybe more play. And again, I don't want to project. I might be projecting that onto you. So, but that has been something I felt myself recently. Yes. And then I sat down the other day and I went, I've got to start saying no. And I need to say no, most importantly for Gina, and really being okay with that discomfort of saying no to people and certain events and things. Yeah.
Huge.
It's huge
opportunity. And I think that's, it's profound. I've said no quite a few times to things in this last, year as things started to open up, and those things I said no to were really important.
Yeah. Last couple of questions. What do you think happens after death?
I mean, I think it's a birth. Personally, I don't think death is the end. I think it's the beginning.
Okay. All right. And if this is a hard one, but if there was one thing that a teacher, mentor, anyone said to you that you feel like, man, this still just kind of like reverberates in my whole system, and what would it be?
I mean, I love him. Gene Carell, he's hilarious. He's always like, there's no coincidence. There's no coincidences. And I feel that. I'm always like, so when stuff comes up, I'm like, interesting. And that always is like, it's the simplest thing. And I'm like, yeah, man, there are no coincidences.
Yeah. Kassia, thank you so much for coming on today. And for everybody listening, if you could just see Kassia's smile, I mean, really, it's a big one. Thank you. And I just want you to share with everybody how they can find you, any offerings that might be interesting. And I'll let you rip.
Well, you can find me online, Kassia Surf. I don't really talk a lot about my energy practice online. I'm more of a surfer, and I'm known for that. That said, that's how people can find me on social media. I do lead retreats, and I post about them there. And then also online, kassiasurf.com. We talk about our retreats there too. It's like I'm not really on social media in any other way. And like I said, I don't really talk about my energy work. Sometimes I'll talk about my sound practice. That said, it's just like, I feel like we're in this radical opportunity for humanity to truly choose to be a global family. And I think in choosing to, if we want to be a global family, we have an opportunity to really shift things for the better and for the greatest good of all. And it comes back to sharing a similar language and really hearing and understanding each other. And within that, it starts with hearing and understanding ourselves. So it's just an invitation to start with you. Practice with yourself, practice with a loved one, practice with your community, and then it really starts to make those changes for the greatest good of all. And it's just practicing. Forgive yourself. We're all doing the best job we can.
Thank you. You're a gem. Love you.
I'll see you soon, babe.
Okay, all right. Bye, babe.
Bye.
Mwah. Hi, friends. If you've been enjoying Spaces Between, please take a moment to subscribe, and leaving a review is the cherry on top. Thank you so much, and I look forward to connecting with you next week.